Okay, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Pietro Ingallina to our VAMP, a penultimate, I think, VAMP meeting. And his current research and studies are in temporality and metaphysics in Spinoza. And main interests are generally early modern, in particular Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, and metaphysics. He is right now a laurea magistrale in Scienze Philosophische, a candidate in Catania. And to my great delight, and is published and presented in quite a lot of conferences and actually has convened conferences, mostly in early modern. But also, if I see correctly, there's also a real interest in ecology. So that probably ties somehow to the metaphysical interests, I assume. Okay, to my delight, the paper is Sympathy for the Devil, okay? An unexplored Machiavellian source in Spinoza's Korte Verhandeling.
Let's go. Welcome to everybody. This is to my presentation, Sympathy for the Devil, an unexplored Machiavellian source in Spinoza's Korte Verhandeling. So my paper explores the idea of the devil in Spinoza, and to this end, I will focus on Spinoza's account of the devil and on its philological source. Particularly, I will show first that Spinoza's characterization of the devil is consistent with the major metaphysical and moral positions expressed in his writings. Second, that the source of Spinoza's idea of the devil has to be found in Machiavelli's literary works. So I will also talk about the idea of the devil in Machiavelli, and I will explain also my philological hypothesis. Before starting, we first introduce a few short remarks about the idea of the devil in Spinoza and the Spinoza-Machiavelli encounter. In Spinoza's works, the devil is almost an unicum. Albeit few other mentions, Spinoza fully takes the idea of the devil into consideration only once, namely in chapter 25 of the second part of the short treatise. Moreover, as far as I know, scholars have never paid much attention to this Spinoza's chapter, and I thought it was time to fill this gap. Regarding the Spinoza-Machiavelli encounter, hitherto the debate has been mainly developed by Italian scholars. The research available consists in a bunch of papers, most of which written in Italian, and only 2 systematic studies by Filippo Del Lucchese and Vittorio Morfino, also available in English. Despite this reasonable amount, so far research concentrated on political thinking only, and I think there is still more to explore about this encounter. So after these preliminary remarks, let us turn to the idea of the devil in Spinoza. In chapter 25, Spinoza of the short treatise, Spinoza writes, "If the devil is a thing that is completely contrary to God and does nothing from God, then he agrees precisely with nothing. But let us just see whether such a miserable thing could exist for even a single moment. If we consider this, we shall immediately find that it cannot. For all the duration of a thing arises from its perfection, and the more essence and divinity they have in them, the more persistent they are. Since the devil has the least perfection in himself, how, I wonder, could he exist? Moreover, persistence or duration in the mode of the thinking thing only arise through the union which such a mode has with God, a union produced by love. Since the exact opposite of this is posited in devils, they cannot possibly exist." Here, Spinoza shows that the devil does not exist. In first place, the argument could be formulated in this way. To own a number of attributes is to have a degree of perfection. To have a degree of perfection is to exist. If a being owns infinite attributes, then it is the most perfect being, therefore must exist, Such a being is God, therefore God must exist. I call this argument the necessity of existence argument, and accordingly, an argument about impossibility of existence may be formulated. If a being owns no attributes, then it is the less perfect being, therefore must not exist. Such a being is the anti-God or the devil, therefore the anti-God or the devil must not exist. Someone may object that the concept of perfection does not apply to the devil, because the devil exists as a purely spiritual entity with an absolutely evil mind. To such people, mostly Catholics, Spinoza would reply that the devil does not exist anyway, but this time the argument will proceed as follows. To persist in time or to have a duration is to have existence. The duration of a mind arises from the union that mind has with God. The love of God is the cause of such a union. If a mind has no love of God, then it has no union with God, and it is an absolutely evil mind. Therefore, an absolutely evil mind has neither duration nor existence. An absolutely evil mind is the devil. Therefore, the devil has neither duration nor existence. Spinoza concludes chapter 25 with the following passage. But because there is no necessity to posit devils, why should they be posited? For we have no need, as others do, to posit devils in order to find causes of hate, envy, anger, and such passions. We have come to know them sufficiently without the aid of such fictions. Spinoza resumes a very close position few chapters earlier. We do not fear God, as others fear the devil, whom they have feigned, so that he will not do anything evil to them. For how could we fear God, who is himself the greatest good, and through whom all things that have any essence, and we who live in him, are what they are? As Mignini notes, the use of the noun versiringe, as well as of the verb versiren, indicates that Spinoza considers as fiction the existence of the devil. However, if chapter 25 tells us only the devil is a fictitious entity, or a fictional object, if you prefer standard Binongian terminology, chapter 18 characterizes the devil as an allegory of evil itself. Spinoza clarifies this very last point immediately after, making explicit that he wanted to indicate not only that there are no devils, but also that the causes, or to put it better, what we call sins, which prevent us from attaining our perfection, are in ourselves. Notably, Spinoza confirms his view many years later in this passage from the Political Treatise, where he shows the absurdity of the religious belief in the devil as a divine personification of evil by claiming that rationality is bounded by passions and everyone is driven by desire, hence that the agency of each thing is not free, rather necessitated by nature or God. Consequently, Spinoza argues that the devil is not the cause of evil, rather humans are. In this way, he commits to an ethics of immanence, since people cause themselves evil and nothing else. It is worth noticing that Spinoza's idea of the devil as a human fiction to explain the existence of entity and of evil, as presented not only in the short treatise, but also in the metaphysical thoughts and in the correspondence with Willem van Blijenberg. Besides, Spinoza's idea of the devil has some direct parallels in the late correspondence with Hugo Boxel, where the latter asks the former what he thinks about spirits and ghosts. To this quite odd question, Spinoza replies that there is no evidence such beings exist, for we know about them only through the first kind of knowledge. In fact, Spinoza argues that no one has ever had any acquaintance of ghosts and spirits, and that we know something about only from other people's stories, either written or oral. Therefore, Spinoza concludes, ghosts and spirits are only a product of human imagination, fictitious entities that are akin to dreams. That is why Spinoza claims that ghosts and spirits, as every other fictional being, neither augment nor detract any perfection from reality. And to think the contrary is to reason according to anthropocentric prejudice. Thus, in letter 54, Spinoza writes, What more it contributes to the adornment and perfection of the world that there should be spirits or all sorts of monsters like centaurs, hydras, harpies, satyrs, griffins, arguses, and more fancies of that kind? Certainly, the world would have been well adorned if God had decorated it as pleases our imagination and fitted it out with things which everyone easily imagines and dreams, but no one can ever understand. If I had as a clear an idea of spirits as I have of a triangle or a circle, I wouldn't hesitate to maintain that God created them. But because the idea I have of them agrees completely with the ideas I find in my imagination of harpies, griffins, hydras, etc., I can't consider them as anything other than dreams, which are as unlike God as being is unlike not being. We have further evidence of this parallel in letter 76 to Albert Birth, presumably written in the last months of 1675. In fact, there are many linguistic similarities between letter 54 and this one, for Spinoza calls the devil the evilest of all spirits and uses the verb to dream, somnio, as a synonym of to imagine, imagino. Spinoza also stresses ironically the absurdity of admitting the existence of the devil, deeming it as a Catholic superstition and a folk belief. We might say this letter represents an effective summary of Spinoza's position about the devil. Spinoza's idea of the devil was quite original for his time, and at this point, the crucial question is, did it pop to his mind out of nowhere? Was it a brilliant and individual insight? Or did he rather take inspiration anywhere? Was there anyone holding similar views? Who? If so, may it be a potential source of Spinoza's idea? Eventually, to what extent? A possible answer to these questions is that Spinoza developed his idea of the devil in relation to the ontological argument. In the history of ideas, the devil often appears when proving the existence of God. According to Nagasawa, Gaunilo's island argument against Anselm's one constitutes a parody objection, which can be directed to any version of the ontological argument and rephrased involving any fictitious or absurd entity, such as the perfect Pegasus from the Descartes-Gassendi debate, the anti-God, the devil, etc. Certainly, Spinoza formulated this version of the ontological argument and might have in mind the debate between Anselm and Gaunilo. However, he did not own their texts, and there is no clear evidence he had access to them. Besides the debate around the existence of God, Spinoza's idea of the devil relates to his fight against religious superstitions. At this very point, my hypothesis is that Machiavelli is the source of Spinoza's idea of the devil. In fact, Spinoza owned Machiavelli's works among his books, which are listed as number 38 in his library. So before getting further into this hypothesis, I will say something about Machiavelli's idea of the devil in order to show the common conceptual ground between him and Spinoza, and hence establish a stronger comparison. Much like Spinoza, Machiavelli was very critical toward traditional religion and its many superstitions, but he does not mention the devil in his philosophical writings, rather in his literary ones. Precisely, Machiavelli discusses the devil in the tale of Belphegor the Archdevil. The story of Belphegor begins in hell. Here, the devils are amazed that so many men flock to hell, alleging that women and marriage were the cause of their misery. In a deft attempt at crisis management, Pluto calls the various courts of the infernal region together for a parliament in hell. At this gathering, the decision is taken to investigate the misogynist claims that mate ultimately gave hell a bad reputation. It is decided that one of the devils will visit Earth to investigate the matter. Since there are no volunteers, the devils draw lots, and the archdevil Belphegor is picked. Belphegor is dispatched to Florence in the shape of a rich and handsome young man named Roderigo of Castile. In Florence, he is to take a wife and live with her for 10 years. Any hardships that may befall him, he has to accept. Once in Florence, Roderigo marries Onesta, the daughter of Amerigo Donati, a noble citizen with more daughters than money. Despite the 100,000 ducats that Roderigo lavishly spends on Onesta, the young woman has a tendency to sulk. Still, Belphegor does all he can to satisfy her. To keep the peace, the archdevil finances the weddings of Onesta's other sisters, and he takes loans to set up her brothers in trade, both alone and abroad. Unfortunately, for Roderigo, all trades do not end up very well, and they are actually a disaster. Inevitably, Roderigo is soon suspected of bankruptcy, and fearing the consequences, he flees from the city. Following a cross-country escape, he meets the farmer Giammatteo del Briga in a village near Florence. In return for protection from the Florentine creditors, Roderigo promises to make Giammatteo's fortune. Giammatteo, who considers that he has nothing to lose, complies. The way to make Giammatteo's fortune will be as follows. Whenever Giammatteo hears of a woman possessed by the devil, he may rest assured that it is Belphegor possessing her. Giammatteo is to exorcise the devil, and Belphegor will leave the victim's body, so that the Giammatteo can collect the generous payment offered by the woman's family. Their first successful exorcism takes place at Florence, but finding that they have not earned enough yet, the two partners in crime proceed to victimize the daughter of Charles, King of Naples. This leaves Giammatteo rich, very rich, while Belphegor has promised that he will not help him anymore, and that he will hurt him as much as he has helped him if they ever meet each other again. Giammatteo then decides to settle in peace and quiet. Not for long though, since one day it becomes known that the daughter of King Louis VII of France is possessed by the devil. Much against his will, the famous exorcist Giammatteo is sent to Paris by the city government of Florence. There, the king orders Giammatteo to cure his daughter, adding that Giammatteo will be sentenced to death if it turns out that he cannot. Inspecting the patient at Paris, Giammatteo, of course, recognizes the presence of Belphegor. He asks the devil to free the daughter and so help him, avoiding the execution. But Belphegor is willing to respect his promise and have Giammatteo sentenced to death. In order to get away with the threat of an execution and to rid himself of the devil forever, Giammatteo asks Louis to erect a scaffold in front of Notre Dame Cathedral and to have in one corner of the square at least 20 men with trumpets, horns, drums, bagpipes, flutes, cymbals, and any other loud instruments. These men are to sound their instruments when Giammatteo raises his head. On the Sunday following, the king-possessed daughter is brought onto the scaffold. In front of a large crowd, Giammatteo whispers to Belphegor to help him, but the devil refuses. At that instant, Giammatteo lifts his head, and the band, now producing a deafening roar, begins to advance toward the scaffold. Asking what is going on, Giammatteo tells Belphegor that his wife has come to fetch him back. The mere mention of Onesta proves sufficient to send Belphegor flying back to the comforts of hell. So, at first glance, it may seem that the subject of this tale is misogyny, but if we read carefully under the surface, we will immediately realize that misogyny plays a small part in the plot. Machiavelli makes very little sarcasm toward Onesta and all the other women in the tale, and uses the marriage of Belphegor-Roderigo only as a narrative expedient to explore religious superstitions and folk beliefs. Indeed, as Maurizio Vigoli writes in his book Machiavelli's God, Machiavelli uses a comic and burlesque narrative as well to mock the religion that instills a fear of hell and of devils in its followers. In the story of Belphegor, a saintly man transported in prayer believed that many of those who had died in the displeasure of God descended to hell through the faults of their wives. To such pious men, Machiavelli explained in his fable that devils were decent and upright men, first and foremost Pluto, king of the underworld himself. The words that Pluto addresses to his infernal advisors and his methods of treating the thorny question are worthy of the finest of earthly princes. End quote. With the help of irony, Machiavelli creates a sharp contrast between morality in hell and on earth. While the underworld is regulated by strict laws and devils follow norms, have specific rules of conduct, respect authority, and honor a deal, human beings are purely chaotic and act egoistically. There is at work in the story a brilliant device of determinant that makes Earth looking worse than hell itself and lead to sympathize with Belphegor condition. As Luigi Russo clearly explains, in this tale, all people behave eviler than the devil. A devil is mon honesta, whose pride is greater than Lucifer's. Devils are all their relatives, who dilapidate all the money of the poor Belphegor Roderigo. Devils are his creditors, who, applying to the magistrates, set out to follow him, not merely with the police, but with the people. An archdevil is in the end the farmer Gian Matteo, who had outwitted the devil, making him retreat and shelter in hell. End quote. Devil is also that monk who for more than 4 years had kept a woman in his cell dressed as a novice. This switch of perspective leads the reader to understand that the source of all evil resides in our world and not in the underworld. In other words, we are ourselves the cause of evil. The devil does not actually exist, and it is a human fiction. At the very beginning of the story, Machiavelli states that the existence of the devil is known through tales and records from the Florentine tradition. And he also calls the devil a spirit, spirito, and an imagined fancy, fantastica immaginazione, emphasizing that the devil is a fictitious object created by human imagination. Therefore, we may conclude that from a philosophical point of view, the 2 main topics of this tale are human imagination and evil. Topics directly connected to the idea of the devil in Belphegor's tale may be found in Machiavelli's Canti Carnacialeschi, a collection of comic poems about religious and moral superstitions. For example, in the Song of the Fallen Devils from Heaven, Machiavelli writes that devils were banished from heaven for their pride, and now live among us, and are the cause of evil. In this carnival, we come to stay with you, because of all evil we are, and will be the principal. End quote. Similarly, in the Song of Desperate Lovers and Women, he writes that devils have the power to affect our lives and trigger bad passions, driving us to madness. Desperate, we are driven by demons at our fearful and ugly lower center. Because we loved them, we were tormented by so many pains at that time, such that we give ourselves to devils to escape them. Thanks to the same détournement device, we know that these are just human beliefs. Thus, in the Song of Hermits, Machiavelli hastens to add that he who sees the devil in very truth sees him with smaller horns and not so black, ironically suggesting that actually the devil is not what people think him to be and is not the cause of evil, rather people are. Now, I should spend a few more words on the early reception of Belphegor's tale, since it is at the source of the infamous reputation of this tale and of its author. In the European intellectual milieu, the tale of Belphegor was immediately received in England. We find theatrical adaptations and references in many important Elizabethan dramas, before the tale was even translated in English, which, according to Ton Hunselaars, means that the cultural exchange between Italy and England during the late 16th and early 17th centuries was hardly affected by the language barrier. End quote. Importantly, Hunselaars recognizes the influence of Belphegor's tale in Barnaby Ritchie's collection of short stories, Ritchie is Farewell to Military Profession, in Ben Jonson's play The Devil is an Ass, in William Houghton's Grimm, the Collier of Croydon, and in the royalist and anti-parliamentarian play The Devil and the Parliament. He also detects references to Machiavelli's tale in Thomas Decker's plays If This Be Not a Good Play and The Honest War, in Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher's The Chances, and in John Taylor's News from Hell, Hull, and Halifax. In particular, Van Dijkhuizen argues that the influence of Belphegor's tale is stronger in Ben Jonson's play, as even The Devil is an Ass suggests that real evil resides in this world rather than in hell, and is human rather than supernatural. The devil is, after all, an ass. This is made clear by the comic ineptness of the devil character Pug, Even though the devil is physically present in The Devil is an Ass, he is a laughingstock, a farcical character without any demonic powers. At the end of the play, the devil character Pug, sent into the world to advance the cause of hell, is taken back to hell by his demonic employer, utterly humiliated by the human immorality which he has witnessed. The vices of hell are nothing compared to those on earth, and throughout the play, Pug praises to his master for relief from his earthly torments. "Oh, chief, call me to hell again and free me." End quote. However, in 1647, Machiavelli's tale was translated as "The Devil, a Married Man," or "The Devil Hath Met with His March," and is still widely known with the alternative title of "The Devil Who Took a Wife." Both titles spot the light on the anti-uxorio subject and foster a misogynist interpretation, missing the actual Machiavelli's intention. Moreover, outside Italy, there are almost no studies analyzing the influence of Belphegor's tale outside of Elizabethan theatre. This may be another reason why the misogynist interpretation of the tale has prevailed, and its main subject commonly being reduced to an anti-uxorio myth. It is now time to go deeper into the comparison between Spinoza and Machiavelli on the devil. Even though there are clear conceptual similarities, I must say that my intent faces an immediate objection. Indeed, one might object that, though Spinoza owned an edition of Machiavelli's complete works, we cannot be sure he had read it, because it is still a matter of debate how many and which languages Spinoza mastered, hence, if he spoke Italian at all. This may be quite a strong objection, but it does not rebut my hypothesis, for I think there is good evidence of the contrary. First, there are more Machiavelli's works and some other Italian books in Spinoza's library. As I've already said, Spinoza owns a copy of the Italian edition of Machiavelli's complete works, printed in Florence and published in 1550, and the Latin translation of The Prince, printed in Switzerland, and published in 1580, listed as number 85 in his library. Besides, he possessed a copy of the Spanish-Italian dictionary, edited by Lorenzo Francesini, and published in 1665, and listed as number 88 in his library, and another book in Italian language, namely Gregorio Leti's Le Visioni Politiche, published in 1671, and listed as number 140 in his library. As Morfino rightly points out, the presence of these books in Spinoza's library supplies us with two unequivocal facts. First, that Spinoza had the possibility of reading the complete works of Machiavelli in Italian. Second, that Spinoza seemed to be capable of understanding Italian. Remarkably, the short correspondence between Spinoza and Leibniz also suggests Spinoza read and understood Italian. In fact, Leibniz asked Spinoza whether he had read the Prodromo, ovvero saggio di alcune invenzioni, nuove premesse all'arte maestra, a treatise on optics written in Italian by the Jesuit Francesco Lama and published in 1670. In his reply, Spinoza answers he had not had the opportunity to have a look at it yet, nec dum vidi. If Spinoza had not understood Italian at all, we would have expected him to tell Leibniz he was not able to read it. As we also know, Spinoza studied humanities and so ancient languages under the teaching of Franciscus van den Enden, and he was also capable of speaking Romance languages. This is a sign that at least he always had a passive command of Italian. Moreover, before at least 19th century, books were not affordable to everyone and not meant for a large audience. They were very expensive and considered luxury goods. Spinoza was not rich and lived his life in frugality. So why owning an expensive and useless object? Why buying a book he could not read? We have to answer affirmatively to this interrogative. In his entry, Spinoza Baruch, in the new Encyclopedia Machiavelliana, Filippo Mignini counts in the political treatise, without considering two explicit quotations from the Prince, which may refer to the Latin translation from the Swiss edition, exactly 92 indirect quotations from Machiavelli's works, 55 from the Discourse of Livy, 29 from the Prince, 5 from the Art of War, and 3 from the Florentine Histories. Except references to the Prince, for which we may doubt and should investigate further because Spinoza could have used the Latin translation, all indirect quotations belong to Italian written works that were accessible in Italian only. In this regard, Morfino argues that Spinoza's argumentation employs a system of reference that privileges the critical reconstruction and discussion of ideas over bare authorship. In Spinoza's work, proper names are in fact extremely rare, a sign that his own argumentation is founded on the clarity of conceptual reconstruction rather than on authorities. Clearly, Spinoza privileges generic references in order to cordon off the theoretical field to which he opposes his conceptual system in the widest possible way, both in the form of a strict demarcation and through the discovery of a third way that renders obsolete the initial dilemma brought to the attention of the reader. Second, this use of quotations in Spinoza gives us a broader ground to look for Machiavelli's presence in Spinoza's works in general, and not only in the specifically political ones. If we compare Spinoza's passages on the devil with Machiavelli's Belphegor, actually we will find quotations too. This will be evident by comparing with Belphegor's tale two passages from Spinoza I have not mentioned yet. In the lines from chapter 25 that I omitted above, Spinoza writes, "If, as some do, we maintain that the devil is a thinking thing that neither wills nor does anything at all that is good, and so completely opposes himself to God, then certainly he is quite miserable, and if prayers could help, we should pray for his conversion." Precisely, Spinoza's intention here is to formulate a parody. If the devil existed, then he would be the most miserable of all beings, for he completely opposes himself to God. Therefore, rather than fear the devil, we should feel sympathy for his miserable condition and pray for him. The conclusion follows from the fact that praying for someone's salvation or redemption involves a kind of emotive attachment. This passage sounds more like a divertissement and is certainly not necessary to the main argument in which Spinoza shows the inexistence of the devil. Why then did he add it? I think he had in mind Belphegor's tale, and that here he refers to the implicit moral Machiavelli gives. In fact, Machiavelli teaches us true devils are humans, and not Belphegor and his fellows. As we have already seen, Onesta completely subjects Belphegor Roderigo to her will, for he is bounded by the love of her. Onesta's siblings dilapidate all Belphegor Roderigo's money, and his creditors want to lynch him. Belphegor is cheated by Gianmatteo too, and eventually he rather descends to hell than spends even a single moment more on earth. This narrative induces us to have sympathy for Belphegor, for he jumps from one sinister to another. Finally, we should consider this passage from a letter of Spinoza to Yari Giel, dated 2nd June 1674. It seems to me that some man offered their wares for sale in the same way shopkeepers do, who always show the worst goods first. They say the devil is a very cunning fellow, but to me it seems that their mind far surpasses his in craftiness. E aurum genius longe unc patritia superare. To me, it seems that if we compare this passage to Belphegor's epilogue, we will see a manifest similarity. And so Belphegor, returning to hell, gave witness to the ills that a wife brought into a house, and Gianmatteo, who had outwitted the devil, che ne seppe più che il diavolo, happily returned home. In my opinion, the last lines from Spinoza's letter to Yale are obviously borrowed from the ones of Machiavelli's tale. Therefore, we can say here Spinoza is directly quoting Machiavelli. To sum up, in this paper I proposed an analysis of the devil in Spinoza's thought and of its possible source, which I identify in the tale of Belphegor the Archdevil, written by Machiavelli. Surprisingly enough, the former is a forgotten chapter in Spinoza's scholarship, while the latter has not been recognized yet. I shew that a comparative reading of the Deer of the Devil in Spinoza and Machiavelli reveals that they commit to an ethics of immanence, radically challenging any anthropocentric worldview and folk view of religion. By denying the existence of the devil and deeming it as a human fiction and a religious superstition, both Machiavelli and Spinoza conclude that evil has neither otherworldly reality nor any metaphysical ground. Rather, people cause themselves evil. This comparison is not founded only on a conceptual level related to the topics of evil and imagination, but also on a philological one. In fact, I showed that Spinoza was capable of reading Machiavelli in Italian, and I provided textual evidence that the tale of Belphegor the Archdevil is actually the main source of Spinoza's idea of the devil. As a corollary, my finding shows that the early reception of Belphegor's tale was not limited to early modern England and Elizabethan theatre, as it has been commonly believed so far. Thank you.
First, let's give a hand to our speaker, to Pietro. Thank you so very much for a fascinating paper, and much as I would like, what I suggest is that if you would, in the chat, just place yourself in the order of questions that you wish to ask, and then I can call on you. That way it would probably be the most efficient.
Okay.
So please, questions, comments. If you don't, let me start then. Have you looked at all at, is there ever a mention, I can't remember, it's been a long time since I looked at the Dialoghi d'amore, or for that matter, Lamento Chinala's man of Leone Ebreo, but Spinoza also had Leone Ebreo on shelves. So first of all, as for his knowledge of Italian, there's no doubt that he knew Italian. I mean, I think that it's absurd to, I mean, this kind of comment, I mean, it's a way that, to attempt to dismiss, and you find it in other, with respect to other figures. In the case of Gersonides, the claim that he did know Latin, which again is nonsense. Anyway, but clearly he knew Leone. Leone was on his shelves, and Leone too would absolutely deny the existence of any evil as an entity, as an ontological category. So that would be another interesting source, I think, to consider.
Definitely, thanks.
In this case, I mean, to me, two other possibilities. I mean, I like the Machiavelli very much, and Machiavelli definitely had quite an important impact on him. But I think the two other figures would be Leone Ebreo, whom everybody wants to claim, and then Bruno.
Giordano Bruno, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, would be two other important figures, I think, to the denial of any kind of the evil as an ontological category. In other words, a complete dismissal of all religious folkloric understanding.
Yes, definitely. While I must admit that I forgot, Spinoza owned also the books of Leone Ebreo, so my fault. But I'm not sure he had a copy of Giordano Bruno's works. Mm-hmm. That I have to check. But thanks for the remark. It's very insightful.
The interesting thing about the Dialoghi d'amore, again, it's a very interesting text because it presents itself initially as a sort of Neoplatonic text, but in the middle you find Averroes. Okay, literally it's hidden in the middle in the classic way in which they hide opinion. In the middle, Averroes and Averroes' position comes, and Averroes is definitely an immanentist or materialist in quite a strong sense of the word. So I strongly recommend taking a look at it. It's a great text anyway, it's fun. And it's supposedly a story of seduction.
Which there may be also a direct influence of the Leone Ebreo's dialogue in the short treatise, since we know that in the short treatise, Spinoza includes two dialogues.
Yeah.
as in the Platonic form, let's say Platonic, and in the Unexplored. And we know that the union between God and a human and the mind is a union produced by love. So definitely Leone Hebreo is a source here too. So thanks.
Yeah, clearly that, and for Leone also the commentaries on the Song of Songs, especially in the case of Gesona, this is very, very important. Okay, great. We've got, thank you so very much. And we've got several people congratulating you and thanking you. And now we have, okay, let's go. Emma, you have a question. It's your turn.
Thank you. Also, I think there's someone else in the chat that is not going to be able to ask the question directly. So maybe you could read it after. But before that, I wanted to ask about how do the two halves of the Korte and Verhandeling texts go together, right? Because they don't seem to be perfectly harmonized. At least when I was listening to you, I had this impression that there's a very strong, structured metaphysical argument that's, classic Spinoza, when he goes, perfection, attributes, something that has no attributes cannot have no perfection, therefore it can have no existence, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes with this weird, addendum, talking about the fact that we should have pity for the devil, or we should pray for him. And those two halves don't quite go together. I mean, not even in the metaphysical ethical, like even if we take away the more religious, context, even if we just wanted to say that the two halves of the argument are the metaphysical one and the ethical one, where he just wants to attribute evil to humans and behavior and not to any lack of perfection, in essence. I'm not sure where the connection is. I'm trying to work it out. Like, if you could say a little more about how they go together.
Okay. Thanks, Emanuele, for your very thought-provoking question. I mean, I think the two parts of the argument go well together because actually Spinoza doesn't want to make an ethical statement. They are both metaphysical and ontological. For, as we know, perfection is not a moral status for Spinoza, is rather an ontological one. So the more perfect something is, the more or the most perfect, as much as something is necessary. So there are degrees of perfection which are linked in a relation with modality, with necessity. And this is argued by John Brandau in his paper Degrees of Essence and Perfection in Spinoza's Two. And Brandau explicitly quotes this passage by Spinoza too. Moreover, as you probably saw, I tried to make this metaphysical commitment much stronger in the passage by modifying the translation. Instead of translating Beständigkeit as salvation, which is the common Carly translation, and it's the same in Italian, I translated this as persistence, because actually in how the Netherlands is, it means the consistency or the subsistence of something. So is persistence. I translated persistence because Spinoza is using the conjunction of, so which is the synonym of sive, like Deus sive natura. In this case, Spinoza is saying Beständigkeit of during, persistence or duration. I hope this answers to your question somehow.
Yeah, it does. It does. We might come back to it after if there's still time, but I don't want to block the queue.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry. We have endless coffee to take together.
Okay. Okay. Andrew, you have a comment.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think it may have morphed into a question based on what Emanuele just said. So I have 2 points. The first is I really like what you're doing. And I think another thing you didn't mention, but that you're really doing, is showing how badly, well, you did mention it actually. You're showing how badly a lot of Machiavelli is read, right? In misreading the tale of the Archdevil as one of just misogyny and not seeing the underlying themes. Another thing to look at there is his discussion of Fortuna in The Prince, where that can be, and it's often, I think, misread as being deeply misogynistic, but missing a greater point that he's trying to make there. So that's the comment. And then this might just be another comment, not a question, but in response to Emanuele's point, one thing to put on the table, if I read you correctly, about how he talks of praying for the devil, is it's almost in something like a contrary to fact subjunctive. So if the devil were real, I would pray for him. It's not quite, he's not admitting anything there. So there might not be quite the stark disjunction, so to speak, but it might just be, if the devil were real and had the kind of power, right, people attribute to the devil, etc., then I would pray for him for salvation. But in both cases, we're looking at these aren't actually. So yeah, thank you. I really like the talk.
Thanks for your comments. I have some answer about the first comment, probably not about the second. In the first case, I of course I considered the case of fortune, the subject of fortune in Machiavelli, but there was not enough space to talk about it in a presentation. I will in a paper. I mean, probably in a brief paragraph or in a footnote, but I definitely will. And in this regard, chapter 15 of The Prince is actually a passage which Spinoza rewrites and rephrased at the very beginning of the political treatise. The incipit of the political treatise is actually a totally rewriting of chapter 15 from The Prince.
Nice. Now, Matt, do you care to share your footnote with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I will. So there were comments in the chat, I think.
Yeah, but you need to unmute.
Hello.
To unmute. Am
Okay.
I? No.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote down what I was thinking. I thought that this issue of the perfection of the devil, he makes a kind of a general argument about perfection and persevering in existence. And I remembered something from the ethics where this isn't the case, or at least, as I say there, it's a little bit reversed. Like if you saw something that persists for a long time, has a long life, that doesn't mean that it was more perfect than other things, is essentially what he's saying in the ethics. It's slightly different because here we're saying that the devil has no perfection and therefore no longevity or no ability to persist in the world, if he has none of the perfections coming from God or God's attributes. So I just thought that was interesting. I wondered if you have any comment. The other thing I was thinking, for some reason, is about cinema and the quote about harpies and chimeras and so on and so forth. In cinema, these tends to be the result of logic. So the filmmaker will draw you in with certain logics. This is probably occurring to me because I'm in the middle of watching Mulholland Drive. So this is probably why this is coming up in my mind. Anyway, that be as it may. Thank you, by the way, Pietro.
Thanks for joining and thanks for your comments. Okay, I must say that David Lynch is my favorite movie director and that Mulholland Drive is one of my favorite movies ever. So, but it's a coffee talk. Let's talk about it for another time.
Yes.
On your first comment, I have to say that, of course, I know the discussion, how the discussion is developed in ethics, but I deliberately let it out. For one thing, because I support a discontinuity interpretation of Spinoza's writings. And I actually think the Conatus argument and the Conatus doctrine is different from the short treatise to the ethics. And this is shown also by Andrea Sangiacomo in his paper, Spinoza's Rethinking of Activity, from the short treatise to the ethics. So that's why I also did not include this discussion.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I tend to think the same thing. I work on the ethics, I read the ethics a lot, and I just tend to disregard the earlier works, which is terrible of me. Terrible of me, but I do. Okay.
Also, the doctrine of temporality and of time and eternity makes a huge difference between the short treatise and the ethics. It's a continuous reworking by Spinoza.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks to you.
Thank you.
Since there's no one else, can I jump in here? Do you really think that it's just a rework, or is it the status of the text of the short treatise? It's addressed to a very different audience. It's not addressed to a philosophical audience.
That's true, and I think that's partly because Spinoza wrote the short treatise in a more divulgative way, let's say, and not within the geometrical methods, no matter the reason why. Maybe he didn't develop the geometrical method yet, or doesn't matter. It's a fact. It's written this way, first. And second, because as we know, the short treatise was meant for the small circle of people that were around Spinoza. And at that time, when he was very young, because the short treatise was written before 1660, the circle was even smaller. So that makes sense that it was written that way. I don't know if that may matters in terms of doctrine, let's say, in conceptual terms. Probably it does, but yes, it has an influence.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I think there's Roberto in the chat.
Okay, Roberto?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I found it very interesting also because it covered things that I'm not actually very expert about, but my question was more related to like, I think you uncover a potential source for Spinoza, but I was interested in understanding, since Spinoza's talking about devils is not found anywhere else, or is not anymore present very much in the rest of his texts. I mean, what do you think it is the purpose of that chapter in the short treatise towards the end? I mean, why does Spinoza feel needs to bring that thing up basically almost at the conclusion of the short treatise, like taking into account the possibility of the existence of devils, which is something that doesn't do anywhere else? Is it just, I mean, why did he find, if you think that it is true that is a reference to Machiavelli, why, what is the purpose of bringing him into the arena in that case? So I guess it's more of a curiosity, but this is to some extent the interest that your paper aroused in me.
First of all, Alberto, really thanks for the question, because it makes me think about the position of this chapter in the short treatise, which is something I didn't address in my talk. As far as I remember, the last chapter, because the chapter on the devil is just before the last one, just before the conclusion of the short treatise, and the very last chapter is about about freedom, namely the real human salvation and redemption. So I think about the position, I think Spinoza addressed the question of the existence of the devil just before human salvation, because the devil is the possibility of human fall, of us being lost, of our sins. And Spinoza says, no, it doesn't exist, it's just human imagination, and that's nonsense talking about the devil. And in this regard, I think Spinoza's target is folk beliefs and religious superstitions, which is something that he really fights, especially when he's younger. Of course, he also does in the appendix to the first part of Ethics, but it doesn't address the question of the devil there. I think that Spinoza is the actual source of, that Machiavelli is the actual source of Spinoza, because Machiavelli has the same target and the same intention. So that's why I think this is the case. And given also the position of the chapter about the devil in Spinoza's short treatise. And as far as I've tried to do, at least I tried to see that even if there are no further conceptual analysis of the devil, nonetheless, the devil is mentioned briefly in some passages in later Spinoza works, and the view is the same.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions, comments? Emma?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that. I think you're completely right in your answer to Roberto. I was just thinking about, he does kind of the same, if you want to think it this way, I guess, in a more radical way in the Ethics, right? When he leads up to salvation, when he leads up to beatitude, he does talk a lot about evil. He does talk a lot about right before part 5, there's the catalog of the passions, which is slavery for humans, right? So it's kind of his move. So just to support Pietro's argument, it's kind of his move. Like, he goes to the depth of non-existence and slavery when he wants to prep the terrain for jumping back up.
Yes, and thanks also for this reference. Of course, my main focus here was the conceptual analysis of Spinoza's idea of the devil and its source. I referenced some passages from other Spinoza works about evil and about fiction, and I was forgetting that about ethics, but there was, of course, no space to talk about it here, but I will develop the issue while writing the actual paper, the final draft, and send it to some journals.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so let's thank our speaker for a great paper. As you see, many of the comments, thank you. And it provides a lot of thinking, which is always fun. And for me, Machiavelli and Spinoza are a perfect pairing. But again, so thank you again. And I hope to see all of you for our last meeting, in which we will be discussing, my colleague and co-convener, Karen Eng, Hegel book. So please the concept of life in Hegel. So I hope to see you there, and thank you all for attending. Bye.